wondered why, after applying for a job and doing all the work and updating your CV and putting it in the right format, and you send your CV off to a recruiter, you just never hear back from them? Or more so, why do they pick young job seekers? So let's talk about the job market, especially in a climate where the unemployment figure is now standing at a staggering 65.5%. That's including, of course, those who are no longer looking for work. Employment lawyer and senior associate at Herbert Smith Freehills, Jacqui Reed, joining us to unpack this. And morning to you, Jacqui. It's always good to have you on eNCA. I suppose the problem with this is people are beginning to get desperate. They're unable to pay their cars, their home loans, put food on the table, and they put a lot of faith into job recruiters, what seems to be a lot of the time false hope.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me. I think what's important to understand, firstly, in relation to employment on the basis of age, is that employers are prohibited from unfairly discriminating in terms of Section 6 of the Employment Equity Act. So it provides that no person may unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against any employee in any employment policy or practice on one or more grounds, including age. But however, it is not unfair discrimination to distinguish, exclude, or prefer any person on the basis of an inherent requirement of the job. So those are essentially the two elements that an employer needs to look at when determining who would be appropriate for a job, and that is what employees need to bear in mind when applying for jobs. So in circumstances where an employee applies for a job and the employee does not get the job, and the employee believes that he or she did not get the job because he or she was too old or too young, then in those circumstances, an employee, that applicant for employment, because the Employment Equity Act also applies to applicants for employment as well as employees in the business, may then refer an unfair discrimination dispute on that basis. Of course, it may be quite difficult to prove that the reason for why you weren't successful in the recruitment process is because of your age, but in the event that you can do so in those circumstances, you would be entitled to relief.
So why would it just not be made clear up front, Jacqui, from the get-go with the job recruiter and the job seeker that this could have an issue of getting you this job because you may be too young or too old? Why is that? Is there a reason that just wouldn't be declared up front?
Because it's prohibited in terms of our law to unfairly discriminate on the basis of age. So there's a recent Supreme Court of Appeal decision which relates to a job applicant in relation to the Defence Force. And it was a Supreme Court of Appeal decision. And what happened is the employee was older than what was required. I think the requirement was 22 to 26 for these young recruits who are fit and healthy, who don't have families and so on. And these were some of the facts that were borne out in the case. And the SCA decided that, in fact, it wasn't unfair discrimination in the circumstances because an employer is permitted to have in place age requirements for hiring certain employees for a particular job, provided, however, that those age requirements are imposed for reasons that bear rational scrutiny and can withstand the constitutional standard of unfair discrimination. So you'll remember that the Constitution also provides that every person is also entitled not to be subjected to an unfair labour practice, and also obviously every employee is entitled, an applicant for employment is entitled not to be unfairly discriminated against. So also importantly, a lot of employers have retirement ages in place already. So, and this is a question that comes up a lot with a lot of my clients is, do we have a retirement age? Because it's not in our contracts of employment. And what you do is then you conduct an assessment of whether or not there's a normal or agreed retirement age, or a retirement age that's been used from a practice perspective, even though it's not written down. And what you often refer to as the Provident or Pension Fund scheme that the employer is a member of. And what we're seeing actually is the retirement age, as we know, is generally at the moment between 60 and 65. But I think a lot of employers are finding that that's actually too low, with people living much longer and being able to work for much longer and being capable from both a physical and mental health perspective to do so.
Jacqui, just very, very briefly before I say goodbye to you, I just want to get your thoughts on this. Please forgive me if I misunderstood you. So right now you've got a situation where you've got a job seeker, you've got an employer, and you've got a job recruiter. In a case where you feel as a job seeker you're being ghosted by a recruitment agency or an individual, is there action that can be taken against the recruiter that is ghosting you?
Well, what you can do is you could say that I'm being unfairly discriminated against on the basis of my age, and I'm not being considered for employment in circumstances where I ought to be. And I think that that would probably go to the Equality Court in those circumstances, because it's not as if there's a relationship between you and the recruiter as such. If it was the employer or future employer that were doing that, then you would obviously have a different a cause of action between you as the applicant and the employer. But in circumstances where recruitment agencies are not even coming near you because of your age, then in those circumstances, I think your rights and entitlements insofar as relief is concerned would be quite different.
Well, I appreciate it, and I think for those that are watching, it may have happened to as well. At least it looks like there might be light at the end of the tunnel, though it'd be much more complicated. Jacqui, as always, thanks for your time. Jacqui Reed, employment lawyer and senior associate at Herbert Smith Freehills.